Hello, beautiful community. Let's do a quick reaction to Trump saying that he is very angry and pissed off at Putin. Now, I've progressed from a 90-second to a 60-second self-administered hairstyle, which is tremendously sensational. And my prison cell is just over there. Now, Trump said in a phone call with Kristen Welken from NBC, which is one of those recorded but not for public consumption conversations from which we get a release of quotes. If Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it's Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it's Russia's fault, I'm going to put on secondary tariffs on oil. There'll be a 25% tariff on oil, a 25 to 50% tariff on all oil. I was very angry, pissed off when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility. Putin has been doing that for weeks and months, but what Trump's referring to is the latest incarnation of it when Putin talked about a UN mandate in Ukraine to oversee elections. And Trump says that's because new leadership means you're not going to have a deal for a long time. So interestingly, the Trump administration that wanted elections has now generated a quote from Trump saying that elections would just delay a possible deal at a time when there is actually more motion and commotion in Ukraine's domestic politics toward possibly having elections than before. And meanwhile, on Putin's side, what we've got is a design not really for elections in Ukraine, but for political instability and Zelensky being replaced. So an election process that doesn't destabilize Ukraine too badly and gives Zelensky another term in power and stabilizes Zelensky's legitimacy wouldn't be favorable for Putin. Putin wouldn't like that. Don't forget, Putin categorizes Zelensky not as an enemy, but as a traitor. And actually, if you gave Putin a deal whereby Zelensky got replaced by somebody who was actually even tougher and more effective against Russia than Zelensky is, Putin would take that if it's just a 1% difference, because that's how much he pathologically is ill-disposed to Zelensky. Now, Trump adds the anger dissipates quickly if Putin does the right thing. So I would view these remarks, you might say, unfortunately, as transitory remarks that don't mean much. My assessment is that Trump doesn't understand what leverage he has over Putin in the short term via sanctions or via any other mechanism, via tariffs. And I think that, as Michael Wolff likes to say about Trump, he says that Trump is incapable of asking for advice when he needs it. Now, Wolff doesn't explicitly talk about, dressing up Trump's traits the way we did on the main channel in terms of a narcissistic personality disorder. But that's a classic NPD thing. You cannot ask for advice you need. So I think that Trump doesn't know and wants not to know what leverage he has. Well, doesn't want not to know, wants not to ask what leverage he has or doesn't have over Russia. Now, you might say that's really, really disturbing and unbelievably frivolous. Well, that's the reality of the administration you're looking at, right? And that's just what came out in Signalgate too, when J.D. Vance was saying Trump doesn't understand the issue around bombing Yemen. So Trump doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know anything about what the reality of the leverage he has is. What is the reality of the leverage? Well, I think most economists converge on the idea that the United States does not have significant short-term economic leverage over Russia. There is plenty of medium to long-term leverage that could make things more radioactive for Russia's economy, but there's nothing that you can do in the short term that will dramatically push Putin into a very different position to the position he's occupying. Is it possible, in principle, for Trump to migrate Putin psychologically from an idealized object to somebody who is expelled from the fantastic imaginary society into which Trump has welcomed Putin, and is then treated as somebody who is dispensable, who doesn't exist, who is no longer a source of narcissistic supply for Putin. Is that possible? It's entirely possible. Narcissists migrate people like that all the time out of the fantastic society into which they've welcomed them into non-existence. But we need to see some movement for that, and that psychologically would be very painful for Trump, who's dependent on Putin at the moment for self-regulation. So I don't see much evidence of that transformation just in these transitory remarks. Putin, for now, is doing an effective press on the Trump administration, which is putting the Trump administration in the position of putting a press on the Ukrainians. Putin could overtax himself in that direction and fail to take advantage of possibilities for reintegration with the West, with Putin, in Putin's hopes, a more authoritarian West that Trump might offer him, by getting too obsessed with Ukraine as a leverage for destabilizing the West. That's a risk for him, but for now, I don't think we are quite there. And while a resolution to the conflict of a very painful kind is still possible, we're not close to it, and it's not looking likely for the time being, with both Putin and Zelensky interested in pushing against Trump's desire for bringing a resolution ASAP. Zelensky is out waiting for more European galvanization over time, he hopes, and for any unforeseen events in Washington or Moscow. Meanwhile, Putin is simply choosing between which way is more effective for bringing it about that Ukraine becomes ungovernable. Is carrying on the war a better way of doing that? Is a cessation of the war a better way of doing that? In principle, he is open to deciding that a cessation of the war is in his eyes a better way of destabilizing the Ukraine and carrying on the war, but is far from being persuaded into that scenario for now. So it's a difficult situation of a kind of impotence for the Trump administration that holds much danger for Ukraine and Europe's security, I'm afraid. Lots of love.